Hello everyone, this is Andy Smith and I'm drawing the Silver Surfer. So let's start. Starting off with his torso. I generally always start off with the character's torso in these small little warm-up drawings I've been doing and posting. Here I'm sketching in his center line. This is waist, throwing down his legs. To me, the Silver Surfer is a stoic character, so he's going to be standing proud, and he'll be holding his surfboard once I get to it. I'm just sketching in his trapezius and shoulders. I'm using an HB lead pencil for this. There I sketched in the curve of the arm at the joint of the elbow. Here I'm sketching in his forearm, trying to keep in mind the basic shape of the underlying muscles. Sketching in his hand, down by his side, just the sweep of his lat. I'm going to throw in where the surfboard is going to go now. I'll flesh out his anatomy some, starting with his chest, his pectorals, shoulder, lightly sketching the arm behind the surfboard. Remember, even though I can't see it, I'm sketching it in so I can have his hand placed properly on the board. Sketching his rib cage, the cut of his rib cage and his abdominal muscles. There's where his obliques coming down to his groin. And sketching in the abdominal muscles again. I'm just doing the top of his chest, working my way up. There I'm sketching in what we call the neck hole, and the neck hole is like it sounds. That's what the neck comes out of. The neck hole, it's kind of like the t-shirt hole on a shirt. The neck comes out of that. From there I'll place in his head. He's not going to be looking directly at us. His head is slightly off center, turned, kind of looking away. Indicating his nose, his mouth, his brow line. Popping in his eyes. Unlike humans, the Silver Surfer, I don't draw him with normal eyes and eyelids. They're more stylized. Bring down his cheekbone and his jawline to his chin. The surfer does not have ears, so I don't have to worry about that, but I'll still stop the side of his jaw where the bottom of the ear would connect. Here we go, sketching in his neck, and going to pull in some of his anatomy on his neck. Here I'm just going through strengthening up some of the lines, adding a little more detail. I won't do full pencils on this because I'm going to be inking it myself, but at the same time, I definitely have to pencil a little bit tighter than some guys I know, even though I'm inking this myself. I like to have a lot of the information there in pencil because it's easier to erase pencil than to erase ink, and I generally always use whiteout after I'm done inking, but I like to keep the whiteout to a minimum. So here I am just tightening up the arms a little more now, getting the shapes down, moving on to his wrist. I always like to block out the wrist so I know exactly how the hand will fall coming off of the wrist, sketching in some of the forearm muscles and anatomy. Now I'm just going to tighten up the hand a little bit more in the fingers, get those down. I should also mention that when I finally do get to inking this, I'm going to be going for a Mobius type feel for the surfer. Mobius and Stan Lee about 30 years ago did a Silver Surfer graphic novel, which to me was just mind-blowing. I've always been a fan of Mobius's work, and the graphic novel they did together was just fantastic, and I loved his interpretation of the Silver Surfer. So in the inks, I want to try and go for that type of feel, which is different than what I usually do for metal rendering and such. And now back to the penciling with sketching in the legs now, adding in some of the anatomy on his thigh. And these drawings are basically about 5.5 inches wide by about 8.5 inches tall. I just take Bristol board and cut it down to that size, and I like doing these warm-up drawings in the morning before I get started on the real work of the day. They're fun and they kind of get my mind going for what's to come. So I got his legs sketched in. I'm going to come back up here to the torso and just tighten up some more stuff. Like I said, I get a little OCD with my work. As you can see, I'm going over lines that I've gone over before, but that's what happens when you have OCD. You just kind of obsess over stuff. I'd love to know what it's like not to have OCD and be an artist. I'd probably be a lot faster. Even that arm behind the surfboard, even though, like I said before, it won't be shown, I still want to get the part that is shown as accurate as it can be. I'm sketching in the surfboard. Now I get to work on these fingers that are holding the board as they wrap around the edge of the board. Now I will say, if this was a commission piece, I would probably lightbox from this to another piece of paper so I could adjust things like pulling him over to the right some so his hand holding the board isn't too close to the edge, and I'd probably lift him up a little bit so his legs don't crop at the knees, because that's not a great crop. But for a warm-up drawing in the morning, little things like that, I just want to take the piece of paper and start drawing. So I'm back to the head, tighten up some of his features, get in there a little bit more with his nose. Even though it's small, I still want to get the details in there. Work around his eyes a little bit more. His brow is pretty low. His eyes are set back. Gives him a nice stern look. He's stern. He's the Silver Surfer. This guy doesn't mess around. He's no jokester. He's no Spider-Man wise cracking. He just gets down to business. You can see when I draw, I spin the paper a lot. I've seen some guys draw where they can just set the paper down and they could tape it to the board and not move it at all, and just amazes me. The other thing about these drawings is usually when I draw, you can kind of see my head poking in every now and then from the right side of the screen. Usually when I draw pages and stuff, I'm really close to the paper. So these drawings are kind of a test for me to back away some with how I have the camera positioned. I can't get as close as I usually do. Tighten up his mouth a little bit more. Just has that stern expression. All right, let's see. I am getting close to the ink stage. I need to rule out the surfboard. I'm gonna rule it in pencil, but when I ink it, I'll probably ink it freehand. So it has a little bit of life to the line, and it's not just a dead weight line, but by ruling it in pencil, it gives me a good guide to go over when I am ready to ink it. If we saw more of the top curve of the surfboard, I would use an ellipse template for it, but it's such a small curve at the top, I can just freehand that. You can see I'm just playing around with the arm behind the board and behind his body. Just like I said, even though we don't see it, it's that OCD part of me that likes to make sure it's sketched in and connects properly to the wrist. Up here, work on that shoulder a little bit. Back down to the leg, just tighten it up a little bit more. I always like to outline the shapes of the anatomy so they're in full, so then when I go in and ink, I can decide at that inking stage what part of the anatomy I want to show and what I want to take out. Move up to the forearm, add a little more detail to his arms. Get in there and tighten up his fingers just a tad bit more. I like a little bit of guesswork, I guess you could call it, when I'm doing the inks, but at the same time, I do like to have 85%, if not more, of the drawing done in pencil. Tighten up the fingers holding the board just a tad bit more. When I was learning to draw and first starting out, hands were always the toughest, and in a way they still kind of are for me. But the good thing is, I draw with one hand and I've got another one I can always look at for reference. Alright, I think I'm getting to the stage where I can start inking. So I'm going to start with my Pentel Fudemoji brush sign pen, extra fine point. In past drawings of these, I've used a thick outline to contain the figure for them, but for this, because I want to go with kind of a Mobius type effect with what he did on Surfer, I'm going to go with a thinner line for the outline with really subtle line weight variation. If you haven't seen my other video where I use this pen, I really like this pen a lot. It is a felt tip brush pen. It has a nice flexibility to it. I'd say it's kind of like a 102 Hunt Quo Quill, except I don't have to dip it in ink. I can use it kind of like a pencil. You can see how I'm holding it. It's more like a pencil. That's pretty different from how I would be holding a real brush that I would dip in actual ink. And I like it too because I can sketch with it. I can do quick short lines. It's a nice overall pen to get different effects out of. And at this inking stage too, I will always go a little thinner because I can always go back and thicken lines up, whereas if I go too thick, I can white them out, but like I said, I'd rather stay away from as much white out as possible. So I'll just tackle this a little thinner. I generally ink all the outlines first, and that is even when I'm inking comic book pages. With figures, I'll usually ink the outline of all the figure work first before I go in to do the details on the inside of the figure and forms. Something about getting the holding line down first, I just like to see. It's more pleasing to me. And then I can gauge the thickness of the interior line work easier when I see what I've done with the outline. The outlining is almost done. Got to do the surfboard. As I said, I used a ruler when I penciled the surfboard, but now I'm just going to ink it freehand so it has a little bit of life to it. Is it just this dead weight line? And when I ink, you can tell I like to pull all my line work towards me. I do know some guys that will actually push the tool away from them, which I've never really tried before, except for feathering. Some feathering I'll do by flicking the pen away, but for most outlining and most inking, I do all the line work by pulling the pen towards me. And when I'm inking, you can tell I really spin the paper a lot when I ink. I'll still use this pen for some of the line work on the inside of this figure as well. Some of the edges of larger forms, like you saw me use it on the top of his chest muscles, the pectorals and such. I like this pen because I can get real delicate with the facial features. It really is a nice, versatile brush pen for thin and thick lines. All right, I think I'm done with that pen. I'm going to move on to a different tool. Now I'll be using my Pilot Namiki Falcon fountain pen. It has an extra fine flexible nib. This pen I discovered from another artist. What I like about it is it's a fountain pen, so it has an ink cartridge, but unlike most fountain pens, this one does have a flexible point. You'll see fountain pens anywhere from a couple bucks at like Target and stores like that, all the way up to a few $100s. This pen, I will say, isn't cheap. It cost about 130 bucks, but what I like about it, like I said, is it has a very flexible point nib. I'd say it's about equal to a 102 maybe Hunt nib that you dip in ink with the flexibility of it. This is a fine point. It also comes in medium and fine. This is extra fine, and it also comes in a medium point and a fine point. I don't have the fine point. I do have the medium point as well, which is a little thicker, that's for sure. But I like this pen because I don't have to dip it in ink. I've had this pen for probably 3 years now, and it has yet to clog on me. I can just pick it up, take the cap off, and the ink flows nicely, even if it is sat for over a week. Cheaper fountain pens will definitely clog if you don't use them on a regular basis. This one doesn't do that. I can get different effects with it. So I thought, because I'm going for that Mobius type of look, I would use this pen to render the metal on his body for all the inside portions, you know, since the outlining's done, because it kind of can give me a nice thin, thick look. I get a little scratchiness with it. It really glides across the paper nicely. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to try this pen for this drawing. I also use it for backgrounds and ruling straight lines because, like I said, it is a flexible nib. So when I'm inking straight lines with it, I can give the lines, even if I'm using a ruler, some bounce and some line weight, which if you're using microns and such, those markers, which I also use, you just won't get that flexibility with those. But this pen you can definitely get nice flexibility with. The lighting on this drawing isn't anything fancy. It's, I guess you call what I like to call an overall lighting. There's not a direct light that would cast large shadows or anything. It's you know, from top left maybe, and I'm just kind of delineating the forms with the metal rendering I'm doing on them, trying to give it a subtle shine to the body. Kind of just playing around with the way I'm doing the metal rendering with the thinner line work. Usually when I do metal rendering, I do it with thicker areas of black to show the shines on the metal, but with this, I'm just going with a thinner feel, scratchier type, thin lines grouped together. So from you could say a distance, and when it's reduced down, it'll give a different type of look to the metal of his body, a different texture and a different feel. Just kind of experimenting, since I'm not usually known for doing metal this way, and trying to have fun at it. I like doing these little ticky type rendering lines is what I call it, where I just did on his back there. I've done it on other areas of his body too. It kind of shows how the form wraps around the body. I did a few more of those little lines on his thigh muscle there. And just coming around to his other leg. So you can see how this pen flows nicely. There hasn't really been any skipping or any ink blotting that you get from cheaper, less quality fountain pens. So, you know, I do recommend it if you have the money to spend on a pen that's about 130 bucks. This pen will definitely last. You'll definitely get your use out of it. As I mentioned before, I've had this pen for about 3 years now, and it has served me very well, from doing inking like this to working on backgrounds, using it with a ruler and a French curve, and just to get different textures. And it does save a lot of time from having to dip it into an inkwell, which I'd have to do with a traditional 102 quill pen point. I should also note that the ink dries pretty quick on the page. I did just smudge it there. You can kind of see it on his oblique lower abs on the right hand side. There's a little smudge that now I'm going to have to use some whiteout to fix. But overall the ink dries rather fast for a quill pen. I also use a smooth texture paper, so it's not rough, so the pen glides nicely over it. I just like that texture for penciling as well. It's a 300 series Bristol. It actually comes in a yellow pad that you can buy. I know some artists like the 500 series, and I just don't see a big difference between the 500 series and 300 series of Bristol, except for the price. The 500 series is almost double the price of the 300 series. So the 300 works fine for me. And it saves me some money, which is important. I'm just adding some last little detail rendering and line work to it. Drawing is almost done. Still have to do the lines on the surfboard. You can see I'm using this pen with the ruler. You can see it works nicely. There's no bleeding involved. Time to do the erasing with my favorite kneaded eraser. Did get a little smear there from a little part of the ink that wasn't dry, but I've already got to use some whiteout, so it doesn't really bother me. I'm always used to working for reproduction, and even though this piece isn't being printed anywhere, I don't like to concern myself with trying to do a piece where I don't need to use whiteout. And you know, I kind of like using whiteout to go in and touch up little areas. I will say, if this was a piece that somebody was, you know, paying me to do and it was supposed to be colored with markers or watercolor, then of course I wouldn't use whiteout. Just going to use the Sharpie Fine Point non-bleed pen to do this graphic design circle shape behind him. My handy dandy circle template. Of course, I also signed my name with that pen. But wait, what about the whiteout? Oh, I'll be doing the whiteout. Going back in now that it's erased and I can see some lines I want to beef up a little bit more with my Pentel brush sign pen. So I'll just go through and beef up some of the outlining with it. Because I'm used to having bolder outlines on my work. Even when I ink my comic book work with a real brush, I usually have bolder, thicker outlines. So this is a real departure for me, and you know, my eye's not used to seeing my work this way, so it's kind of a fight not to go in and really beef the line work up. So for whiteout, I use Copic Opaque White, and it has a built-in fine brush that you'll see. I love this whiteout, and one of the biggest reasons is because of the built-in fine brush. You can get really nice fine lines with it. You can clean up and do some nice detail work with the whiteout. So even if you're not correcting a mistake, let's say you're just cutting into some of the black area to do a special effect, and you need a nice fine line, well, this brush is great for that. And I can control this brush pretty well also. And since I already have to do whiteout in one area of the drawing, it just opens me up to go through and just, you know, be a little more anal retentive and just clean up a lot more stuff that I might not like as well. Because that's the one problem with using whiteout like this is, even though it's Copic whiteout, it does eliminate the possibility of going in and using markers over top, because you'll definitely be able to see where the whiteout was if I put a marker over top of it. So that is a drawback. But when I scan this and adjust the levels in Photoshop, you'll never be able to tell, and it's a piece that could be colored digitally and look really good. Which, who knows, maybe down the road I'll do a little digital color on it. All right, I think I'm about done with the whiteout. I've got it out, just looking for any other small areas that I might need to touch up. I think that's about it. Oh, here's the finished piece after I scanned it in and adjusted the level so you can see more of the detail. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. I hope you come back for more. Please subscribe to my channel so you can get notifications of when I upload a new video. Thank you. Bye.